Tonight we talk about crusades, or rather we tell a crusade, the fourth. Did you know that the crusades are numbered for convenience, usually counting 8 or 9, and the one we are discussing today is the fourth, which takes place in the very early 200s, and which among all has the most surprising, most unexpected outcome, in the sense that instead of going to Jerusalem, the Crusaders ultimately, due to a series of circumstances, they will go to Constantinople and conquer Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. I will tell you this story using the words of 3 eyewitnesses, 2 who were in the Crusader army, and 1 who was in Constantinople and saw them arrive. I will introduce them to you little by little as they come before me. First, let's talk a bit more generally about what the underlying theme is, that is, what the Crusades are. The Crusades can be told in many ways. They can be described as enterprises driven by imperialism, the desire for conquest, and profit. The Crusades can also be told as the first manifestation of that colonial drive, that in the subsequent centuries will lead Europeans to conquer America, Africa, and much of Asia. It may seem anachronistic because we associate colonialism with the modern age, but if you think about it, the Crusades are the first instance after the fall of the Roman Empire, in which armies and naval fleets depart from Europe to conquer territories in other continents, such as... Now, all of this is an absolutely correct description. The Crusades are great military enterprises aimed at conquering territories, founding kingdoms, and acquiring loot. But those who went there would never have told it that way. Of course, they knew very well. They weren't stupid, nor were they naive at all. They knew very well that often those who set out were also motivated by the desire to get rich. But perhaps it was simply about seizing an opportunity to change one's life, because you understand that going on a crusade meant being sure to be away for years and, if the opportunity arose, perhaps never returning. They knew very well that one of the important motivations driving them to leave was also, if we want to put it elegantly, the desire for adventure and to see the world, but then also very concretely the desire to get rich. Everyone knew it. However, for them, it was obvious that the true reason, the main reason why those armies set out, was that Christians had to possess Jerusalem, the holy city of their religion, and it was intolerable that Jerusalem was left in the hands of the infidels. Here, we will not recount when and why at a certain point in Europe, among the Christians of Europe, this belief arose that it was essential to possess Jerusalem. However, you must accept that the men we will talk about tonight set out for the crusade and lived in a world where their parents and grandparents already took it for granted. Jerusalem must indeed be ours, and those who command us have the precise duty to spend their resources to achieve this goal. Here you understand we can react to their conviction as the Enlightenment thinkers of the 18th century, Voltaire and Diderot, reacted, who believed that the Crusades were proof of how foolish human beings can be. They were astonished at the idea that there had been a time when people were so foolish. An era of such deep darkness and great bewilderment among the peoples and indeed among the rulers regarding their true interests, that it could truly drag a part of the world into an unfortunate small country, which would naturally, in fact, certainly be Palestine, in order to slaughter the inhabitants and seize a piece of rock that was not worth a drop of blood. Thus, I will say, if I am not mistaken. Or we can also, if you wish, reflect on the fact that even today, the question of whether Jerusalem is or is not the capital of the state of Israel remains a matter of debate that moves international chancelleries and causes blood to be shed. If you prefer, We could also ask ourselves whether spending billions and dying for Vietnam or for Crimea is any more rational and different compared to their belief that it was worth dying for Jerusalem. But that is not the point. What matters is that we must accept. Note that I am not necessarily saying that it is absurd to die for Crimea. I am saying that it may not have been absurd to die for Jerusalem within their value system, in their worldview. In any case, they thought this way. Conquering Jerusalem is a mission for the Christian world, and no one could even think of questioning it. Or rather, perhaps someone thought of him. His name was Francis of Assisi. But that is another story, and I will tell it to you another time. He is the only one who at some point probably had the idea, but maybe we are getting everything wrong. This stuff doesn't make sense. But instead, all those I will tell you about tonight were convinced that it made absolute sense. Conquering Jerusalem is a duty of the Christian world. And indeed, they had conquered it 100 years earlier, with what we call the First Crusade. Let's clarify this once and for all. They did not call them crusades. The word crusade is a modern term. They referred to it as the Holy Journey or the General Passage. And the Crusaders, well, the Crusaders sometimes called themselves that. They had the word. Why is one a Crusader? Because when you made a vow to depart, you had a cross sewn onto your garment, so that everyone could see that you had taken this commitment, and therefore you were, as they said in their Latin sources, a crus signato, marked with the cross, a crusader. However, in reality, they used the word sparingly. Normally, our witnesses of the Fourth Crusade, of whom I will speak, and whose words we will hear, when they talked about themselves having left home, they referred to themselves as pilgrims, because every expedition was a pilgrimage. I was saying that 100 years before, Jerusalem had been conquered or liberated, as Torquato Tasso would say centuries later. But in a world where the idea of the crusade, that Christians and Muslims inevitably must fight each other, was still very clear, even in Tasso's time, right? Jerusalem liberated. Jerusalem had been conquered, and the Christians had held it for almost a century. And then the Muslims had indeed found a leader more capable and skilled than the others. His name was Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Joseph son of Job, with the nickname Saladin ad-Din, the righteousness of faith. For us, Saladin is already for Dante. Saladin, who was born in Tikrit, like Saddam Hussein, in 1187, nearly 90 years after the First Crusade, annihilates the army of the Kingdom of Jerusalem at the Battle of Hattin on the Sea of Galilee, the place where Jesus walked on water, and Saladin recaptures Jerusalem. Of course, the fact that the infidels recaptured Jerusalem after 90 years evokes enormous emotion in Christian Europe. From that moment, the Christian world mobilizes, and a crusade begins immediately, the third one. In the end, he is unable to recapture Jerusalem, and at that point, organizing a new crusade to reclaim Jerusalem is high on the agenda of all the leaders of the Christian world. It is one of the main objectives. In January 1198, a new pope, Innocent III, was elected. Just to clarify and to give an idea of how the medieval world was different from ours, when we imagine the election of a new pope, well, I think we all have a certain image in mind. Innocent III, when he is elected pope, is 36 years old. This is perfectly normal. And this 36-year-old pope immediately begins to try to convince the Christian rulers that it is their precise duty to mobilize their resources and set out to reclaim Jerusalem. A few months have passed since he was elected. On August 15th, 1198, the feast of the Assumption Innocent III sends a circular to all Christian rulers and princes. He sends a circular. The papal chancery in Rome is a powerful governing body with a multitude of clerics capable of sending copies of the same letter to all princes and all bishops of Christian Europe within a few days. The letters from Innocent III invite everyone to set aside their other concerns and depart for the Holy Land. Everyone. It is clear that the more important those who go are, the better it is. Innocent III primarily has in mind the kings of Christian Europe. Two are the most powerful kings at that time. Philip II, King of France, and Richard the Lionheart, King of England. Philip and Richard had already been to the Third Crusade a few years earlier and had fought so fiercely that upon returning from the crusade, they declared war on each other and were still battling. Now the Pope hoped, as he stated in his appeal, that they would make peace and set out for the Holy Land. Of these two kings, the most powerful in Europe, Philip, King of France, was not a warrior. Richard, on the other hand, Richard the Lionheart was a great warrior. He was the only Christian commander who managed to win a battle against Saladin during the Third Crusade, the Battle of Arsuf, which was not enough to reclaim Jerusalem, but it was enough to reclaim a port, the port of Jaffa, which allowed the Christians to maintain, you see, a foothold in the Holy Land. I think that Pope Innocent III primarily hoped for Richard, who was exalted by the troubadours, the poets he generously paid, and thus was obviously celebrated by the troubadours as the bravest and most generous knight in the world. And it was of little concern if he had a certain tendency to massacre prisoners. On March 26, 1199, King Richard the Lionheart, who was besieging a castle in France, was wounded in the shoulder by a crossbow bolt. The wound became gangrenous, and 11 days later, Richard was dead. As for King Philip II of France, it does not seem that he saw Richard the Lionheart's death as a signal. He was careful not to commit to departing. And of course you understand that even Richard the Lionheart's little brother, King John, had other troubles at home. At this point, the momentum for the departure of the crusade risks slowing down. A great preacher emerges named Fulco of Neuilly, who launches a major preaching campaign for the crusade in France. Keep in mind that at the time, great preachers were like stars. They were people capable of standing on a stage and speaking for hours to an audience that was standing or kneeling, not sitting, and they could hold the attention of a huge crowd for hours on end, making them cry and making them laugh. The preachers are a powerful force at the time, and Folco di Noi is commissioned by the Pope to invest in the preaching of the crusade. Folco di Noi is a great preacher who speaks about poverty, which is the trending topic at that time, because in a growing Christian world that is becoming increasingly rich and complex, this theme is gaining prominence. Basically, there are more and more people who can read, and those who can read first want to read the gospel. The good people who read the gospel alone at home for the first time in their lives discover that Jesus and the apostles went barefoot, unlike the bishop who rides a horse. When did Jesus ever ride a horse? When Jesus walked barefoot. They were poor and worked. This discovery that Christianity is a religion for the poor is something that shocks the society of this era. And those like Folco di Noi become famous precisely for their ability to convince people that Christianity is not just the religion of the Pope, the bishops, the powerful, but a religion that also cares about you, about the people, about the poor, about those who suffer. Folco di Noi is indeed tasked with preaching the crusade, and in the winter between 1199 and 1200, some of the greatest, most notable and influential princes of northern France decide to take the cross in the year 1096. Count of Champagne, the Count of Blois, the Count of France, the Count of Saint Paul. And indeed, for every count who takes the cross, there are dozens of his great vassals who take the cross with him, and each brings along dozens of his knights. So in reality, at this moment, the possibility of launching a great army from France is taking shape. The first of our witnesses is one of the esteemed great lords who took the cross that winter, convinced by the preaching of Folco di Noli. His name is Geoffroy de Villehardouin. He was a vassal of the Count of Champagne. He was the Marshal of Champagne, which means the commander of the army of the Count of Champagne, a great lord, one of those who own many castles and have dozens of knights at their command. Geoffroy de Villehardouin recounts that at that time there was a holy man who preached the crusade, and the Pope had made great promises. Because obviously, when the Pope launches the idea of a crusade, he must offer something. What does he offer? He offers spiritual rewards. He offers absolution from sins. And for these people who commit many sins, who believe after death a devil and an angel come to decide which side you will go to. For these people, absolution from sins is a concrete, significant thing for which it is worth risking their lives. Geoffroy de Villehardouin, Marshal of Champagne, the Pope had indeed promised that all those who took the cross and served God for a year in the arduous expedition would be completely absolved of all the sins they had confessed. And since the forgiveness was so truly and genuinely great, the hearts of the people were very moved, and therefore many took the cross because the forgiveness was so certainly and undeniably great, and each of them certainly told themselves, when I heard that the Pope had promised absolution from all sins, well, how could I stay at home? Then, of course, one goes to see and also discovers that some of those princes in the great war between the King of France and King Richard of England had sided with King Richard. And now that King Richard had died suddenly, they found themselves a little exposed. And so departing for the crusade is also a way to escape a political situation that has suddenly become difficult. It is a way to tell the King of France, look, don't worry because I'm leaving. I leave my lands to be governed by my wife under the protection of the church. Because whoever departs for the crusade, the church commits to protecting what they leave at home. It is a way to escape a complicated situation. It should also be said, here is one of those details that lengthen the lesson, that I was uncertain until the last moment whether to cut it or not. Then I couldn't cut anything. These ones depart for the crusade very well. But the Count of Champagne, who is 22 years old, departs for the Fourth Crusade. His father had participated in the second. His older brother had participated in the third. The Count of Blois had already been to the third. Geoffroy de Villehardouin, whom I will mention often, one of these great lords who depart, had participated in the third, had been captured by the Saracens, and had remained in captivity for several years before being ransomed and returning home. And now he can't wait to leave again. This is something, how to say, that should make us reflect, right? To try to understand what was on the minds of these people. Well, so, many French princes with their vassals have taken the cross. There are enough to field a formidable army. So one might say they can depart amidst the applause of those who remain, the tears of the wives slowly. They can depart calm. Because the times when a great lord would leave with his vassals had long since ended. They were automatically obliged to go with him, because in exchange for the lands they had received as fief from the Lord, they were required to serve him whenever he asked. Those times are no longer. Europe in the year 1200 is a growing, formidable economy. Since the time of the First Crusade, Europe has changed just as China has changed, from Mao's China to today's China. In 1200s Europe, nothing gets done without money. There is a lot of money circulating, but no one lifts a finger unless they are paid. And so a knight goes to war when his lord asks him to, but he wants to be paid. And even more so, others must be paid, because an army is not made up only of armored knights. It consists of archers, crossbowmen, foot soldiers, who are mercenaries, professionals. And they need to be paid. Not only that, but for all these people, thousands of knights, tens of thousands of foot soldiers, thousands of horses. All these people need to be fed, so there are supplies of bread, wine, meat, hay, and oats, because horses cost as much as men, if not more, to maintain. Essentially, funds are needed. Thus, no expedition can depart without allocated funds. The Crusaders themselves contribute. A great lord, the Count of Champagne, who takes the cross, may also commit to paying his knights and archers who follow him. However, overall, a lot of money needs to be raised. The Pope must also contribute. Fulco of Neuilly, who preaches the crusade, is also tasked with raising funds. And here, of course, there is the paradox of a preacher who became famous, speaking about poverty, and who now, at a certain point, begins to collect the money that will be used to pay for the expedition. It doesn't take long for gossip to quickly and mysteriously begin to circulate in Christian Europe about where the money that Fulco of Neuilly is collecting has gone. Very popular and beloved. After a while, Fulco learns that people are gossiping about him. All that money hasn't been seen so far. Who has accounted for it? Where are the accounts? The Pope himself must announce that the Church will commit to raising the money. The clergy will be taxed innocent. 3 announces. A tax on the clergy's income in December 1199. Throughout Europe, from Sicily to Sweden, the clergy will pay 1/40 of their income to finance the crusade. And throughout the region, now again, to understand what kind of world that is, 1/40 is obviously 2.5%. For us, used to our taxes, the idea of having to pay 2.5% makes us laugh, as I see you laughing. In that world, it is a gigantic scandal. The Pope knows very well that the clergy will do everything to avoid paying this crazy tax, to raise all this money. So much so that he must guarantee that it will not set a precedent. If you pay, we won't come back next year to ask for it again. After that, why do they need so much money? Partly we have said it, because all these people need to be paid and fed. But there is also another reason. And it is about the fact that these are not the times of 100 years ago. During the First Crusade, 1095-1099, the Crusaders who left from France and Germany went to Jerusalem, and they went on foot, crossing Europe, the Balkans, the Byzantine Empire, Turkey, and finally arriving in Jerusalem. Now it is no longer conceivable. The world is different. The world has changed. No one thinks anymore that such a journey is made on foot. Why? Because there are the Italian cities. There are those that we call the maritime republics. They didn't call them that. But anyway, there are Venice, Pisa, Genoa, and also Amalfi. They have fleets, control the Mediterranean. And 100 years earlier, it was just the beginning. Now they are there. The Mediterranean is in the hands of the Italian fleets. And of course, if we want to go across the sea, we go by sea, not on foot. So we need to contact these Italians to understand how much it would cost to transport all of us across the sea. Because they certainly don't do it for free. Do you think? They make various contacts and eventually decide to seriously discuss matters with the Venetians. They send a mission of great barons to Venice. Our witness, Villard-Douin, Geoffroy Villard-Douin, is one of the barons sent to Venice. And he tells us in detail about his journey to Venice. We arrived there and spoke with the Doge. The Doge is one of the prominent figures in our history, and I will mention him often. His name was Henry Dandolo. He was old, blind, and very shrewd, as everyone says. And he governed Venice with extraordinary skill. Villard-Douin and the others go to the Doge and explain, so and so, the greatest princes are departing from France, a large army, we need to be transported across the sea. How much would it cost? They sit around a table and start to do some calculations. In the end, they arrive at a price for the ticket. They estimate that the army will consist of 4,500 knights and 20,000 foot soldiers, and therefore also 4,500 horses. The Venetians prepare the contract specifications to transport across the sea and to accompany and feed, supply for 9 months an army of that size. The price will be 4 silver marks for a horse and 2 marks for a man, for a total of 85,000 marks. What is a mark? Keep in mind that at that time in Europe, gold coins were not in circulation. Gold coinage had already ceased with Charlemagne, and for centuries Europe had been too poor to afford gold currency. Now at the beginning of 200, Europe is experiencing significant economic growth, and soon the Italian cities will decide that after all, we can afford gold currency, and Florence will mint the florin, Venice and Genoa will mint the gold ducat, but Frederick II in the south will mint the gold augustale, although that is still a few years away. At that moment, only silver coins are in use. The mark, which later obviously became the name of the German currency in modern times, was not a coin at that time. It was a unit of weight that varied from one region to another, but roughly it could be 2.5 ounces of silver. Essentially, a knight with his horse and 2 squires would have spent 2.5 kilos of silver to pay for the travel ticket. The total of $85,000 marks corresponds to more than 20 tons of silver. I must tell you right away that the current prices of silver are not that much compared to current airline ticket prices, all in all. But in relation to the price balance of the time, it is obviously a colossal sum. After that, the Doge, after they drafted this charter, responds, saying, "This is the trade agreement, but we will come with you. We will also participate in the crusade, and since we will surely make conquests, we commit to accompany you with 50 war galleys." I quote Villehardouin, who says, "The Doge told us that as long as our company lasts, we will share equally in all the conquests we make and the spoils. Now discuss among yourselves if you can do it and if it suits you." You understand, the Doge of Venice is proposing a commercial company. The commercial culture of the Italian cities is already at that level. We invest, create a company, we will make profits, and we will share the profits equally. At this point, Villehardouin observes the decision-making mechanisms of an Italian commune, where it is not just one person who decides. Back home, the Count of Champagne consults with his main vassals and then makes a decision. Here, no, the Doge of Venice must convene his inner council, then an expanded council, and then an even larger one. Villehardouin says he was very skilled. He convinced everyone to accept this agreement. And in the end, the Doge summoned the assembly of the people, 10,000 men, says Villehardouin, in the chapel of San Marco, the most beautiful. He indeed has a mass said, and then invites the ambassadors of the Crusaders to explain to the Venetian people what their mission is. A scene follows that is truly emblematic of the type of behaviors and reactions of the men of that era, who can be extremely emotional in circumstances like this. Villehardouin says, "We found ourselves there when the Doge told us, 'Explain to the people,' and we said, 'Gentlemen, the most noble and powerful barons of France have sent us to you, and they implore your grace to have mercy on Jerusalem, which is in servitude to the Turks, that for God you would accompany them to avenge the disgrace of Jesus Christ. And they have chosen you, you Venetians, because they know that no people who go by sea are indeed as powerful as you, and they have commanded us to fall at your feet and not to rise until you have agreed to have mercy of the Holy Land overseas.'" And at this point they kneel before everyone crying, and everyone starts to cry, and everyone begins to shout, "Yes, yes, we grant it." And there was such a noise, such a clamor, that it seemed the world was collapsing. The emotional appeal, the ability to cry, the call to honor and disgrace, to shame and revenge, are all things that have a power in the hearts of the men of that era. And the Doge addresses the people and says, "You see, gentlemen, see the honor that God has bestowed upon you, that the best people in the world has asked for your company to do something so noble together as the rescue of our Lord. So wonderful. Everyone is crying, everyone is applauding, they all agree. The agreement is made. At this point, the first installment must be paid. 85,000 marks. But the first installment is advanced, and the ambassadors borrow 5,000 marks in Venice itself and pay them to the Doge, handing them over to the Doge to begin the construction of the fleet. Oh, one detail we have said so far to go beyond the sea, but exactly where. They weren't going blindly. A strategy was being established exactly. And while in the past, the idea was to land in the Holy Land and smash everything, now experience has taught that one must be a bit cautious. Because if you land in the Holy Land, you find the entire Arab world to the north, Syria, Iraq, and on the other side you find Egypt, and from there the enemy comes from all sides. Therefore, for quite some time, they have been starting to think that an expedition that is to be successful must be studied in a different way. One does not go directly to the Holy Land, but to Egypt. Because if we take Egypt and its great cities, Cairo, especially Alexandria, we will have a great port at our disposal. And above all, we will split the Muslim world in two. And once we have established ourselves in Egypt, going to Jerusalem is much easier. So the agreement is to go to Egypt. It's not just strategic reasons, you know. The Venetians also have something else in mind. Egypt is a huge commercial hub. Caravans from China and India arrive in Alexandria with spices from the Red Sea. It is one of the great ports of the Mediterranean, and naturally trade occurs with Alexandria, Egypt. In theory, it would be forbidden to trade with infidels, as established by the Third Lateran Council. But everyone does it anyway, of course, like all the things the church prohibited. Everyone did them anyway, being a bit more careful, or at most you would ask the Pope for an exemption. The Venetians have recently obtained permission from the Pope to trade with Egypt. It seems like current affairs today, as long as they do not export military material, weapons, metal, nothing. For everything else, feel free to trade, oil indeed, gas, that still circulates. After that, in Alexandria and Egypt, the Venetians faced competition from the Genoese and the Pisans. So the idea, if we were to conquer it, Alexandria, all in all, could be worth it. Thus the ambassadors return to Venice all happy. The agreement is made, the advance is paid. They arrive home, and there they find a cold shower. The Count of Champagne, who was the first and most powerful of the princes who had taken the cross and was 22 years old, falls ill and dies. Suddenly, they all indeed agreed that he would be symbolically the leader of the crusade. In fact, let's be clear here. An expedition like this never has a leader in our modern sense. Every prince there with his vassals does what he wants. And at most, he agrees to participate in a war council where together we decide what to do. However, nominally it is fashionable to appoint an authority. It was supposed to be the Count of Champagne. Who does it now? They can't come to an agreement. And at a certain point, a name comes up. Villard-Douin says that he is the one who suggested it. Marquis Boniface of Monferrato. So an Italian, or rather a Lombard, as they would have said, not a Frenchman, but a great prince, one of the great European princes, a member of a family that has had a very strong relationship with the crusading enterprise and the Kingdom of Jerusalem for a long time. The father of Marquis Boniface, Marquis William the Elder, he had been captured by Saladin at the time when Saladin conquered Jerusalem. The son of the old Marquis, Boniface's older brother, Conrad Marquis of Montferrat, had arrived in the Holy Land, and through a series of adventures, he managed to take command of the remaining crusading forces, survivors, after the defeat inflicted by Saladin. He heroically defended the port of Tyre against Saladin, thus once again ensuring the Crusaders' maritime connection with the homeland. Saladin had besieged Tyre, defended by Conrad of Montferrat, without being able to capture it. At one point, Saladin, hoping to convince Conrad to surrender, has his father, the old Marquis William, brought under the walls of Tyre, threatening to execute him if Conrad does not yield the city. Marquis Conrad from the walls replies, "My father has already lived enough." At this point, of course, Saladin does not have the old Marquis executed. Rather, he sends him home with many greetings. However, the fact remains that Conrad is the hero of the crusade, elected by the barons as king of Jerusalem. A few hours later, he is stabbed to death in a street in Jerusalem, and it is never known by whom. The younger brother Boniface is the one to whom the French barons now go to propose leading the crusade. We might think that perhaps the Holy Land did not bring good fortune to Montferrat, but you have already understood that they reason differently. Boniface eagerly accepts. And at this point, we have everything. We have the transport, we have the agreement with the Venetians, we have the appointment, spring of 2002, we all meet in Venice. And in the spring of 2002, the Crusaders begin to depart from northern France and flow towards Venice. There, the first troubles begin to arise because not everyone agrees that it is a good idea to depart from Venice. There are people who prefer to depart from Marseille. There are people who do not want to leave with the majority. They want to leave on their own. But overall, most arrive in Venice. One of those who arrives there is the second of our witnesses. He is not a great baron like Geoffroy de Villehardouin, one of the leaders of the crusade, one of those who negotiate and know the secrets. No. The second witness, named Robert Clary, is a knight, an ordinary knight, a poor knight, as he says. Because he sees the aristocratic world divided in two. There are the great lords, whom he calls in his northern French dialect the riche homme, the rich. And then there are us, their vassals, the poor knights. Of course, you understand, a knight in that society is still a lord. For the peasants, a knight is one of those who commands. But compared to the princes, the great barons, a knight like Robert de Clary feels like an ordinary person, an average person. The great barons, Villehardouin has already seen her in Venice. He went to negotiate with the Doge. Robert de Clary arrives in the spring of 2002. He has never seen her in his life. And here it comes out, how to say, do you know what the reason is that I am telling you this long story tonight? It is that the theme of this year's festival is wonder. And so wonder is the common thread of the memories of these men who have seen Constantinople and who before Constantinople have seen Venice. And that alone was enough to astonish them. Robert de Clary arrives in Venice, and he recounts all these ships of many different types, using all the technical terms, the dromons, the ushers. When the pilgrims were all gathered in Venice and saw the powerful fleet that had been assembled, the rich ships, the great dromons, and the ushers to carry the horses and the galleys, they were very amazed, and of the great wealth they found in the city. Now, Venice is a very large city, but there are many pilgrims, thousands. In the city, they find no place. They are all sent to the Lido, to camp under tents at the Lido of Venice. And the fleet is ready, and the construction of the fleet has been a colossal undertaking. And now that the pilgrims have arrived, the Doge presents the bill. And here the troubles begin. Because the agreement was to transport 4,500 knights, but instead they were very optimistic. Villehardouin says it is because of all those bastards who went to embark elsewhere, because if they had all come to Venice as decided, there would have been no problem. The fact is that in Venice, instead of 4,500 knights, there are only 1,000, and foot soldiers in proportion. But the Doge wants to be paid. This is a contract, guys, you signed it, so the amount is that, so the Crusaders tax themselves. Each knight, instead of 2 marks, pulls out 4, plus 4 for the horse. Even the poor are made to pull out money, 1 mark each. Even the poorest do the math, still missing $50,000 marks, more than half of the total. And the Doge begins to get slightly nervous. Clary says the Doge gave us the following speech. Gentlemen, You have put us in trouble, because I ordered throughout my country that no merchant should go trade and that everyone should help gather this fleet. And they all worked on it and earned nothing for a year and a half. In fact, they have spent a lot, and therefore my men, and I as well, want you to pay the money you owe us. And if you don't do it, know that you will not leave this island. Everyone is at Lido until you have paid us. And you will not find anyone to bring you food and drink. In fact, Robert de Clary adds, the Doge was a good person. He didn't prevent them from bringing us food and drink. After that, they make another collection, pull out everything they still have in their bags, borrow everything they can, pay, but still lack 36,000 marks. At this point, the Doge proposes a solution and says, look guys, we were accidentally preparing for a small expedition. There is a city nearby in Dalmatia called Zara, which used to obey us but has now rebelled, no longer wants to obey, has placed itself under the protection of the King of Hungary, and we are about to leave to take back this city. If you accompany us to conquer Zara, we will surely make a lot of loot. With your share of the loot, you can pay for the ticket, and at that point, we will take you to Egypt. And the leaders of the Crusaders are faced with the alternative that will continue to haunt them for the rest of the crusade. And that is, there are those who say, but we didn't come to do something like this. No. And there are those, the majority, who in fact have the syndrome that they are unable to allow the venture to fail. It is such an enormous effort. We have put together such an army, and we let everything go to waste because we are short on money. No. The absolute priority is that the crusade goes on. And if to move forward, we have to make agreements with the Venetians, we will, and those who disagree are traitors. Willard Duane is one of those who sees traitors everywhere. Everyone who says, but really I committed to going to Jerusalem, not to going to Zara, for him are traitors who do not want the crusade to succeed. There is also a papal legate accompanying the expedition, and the papal legate ensures that the Pope, if he knew, would agree as well. The most important thing is that the expedition does not fail, so absolutely move forward. In fact, the significant issue is that the Christian city of Zara has placed itself under the protection of the King of Hungary, who is not only Christian, but has also taken the cross himself. And yet, ultimately, in the end, the majority of the leaders decide to accept the Venetians' offer, says Roberto Clary, the poor knight. But none of the army knew about this decision, except for the most important leaders. At this point, the Doge returns to the scene and makes a grand theatrical move. We have already mentioned that 50 Venetian galleys will join the crusade with their crews, so a large number of Venetians will also depart to accompany the crusaders. The Doge gathers all the Venetians who are to depart with the crusaders in San Marco, climbs onto the pulpit and speaks to the people. Gentlemen, you are in the company of the best people in the world and for the highest undertaking that anyone has ever faced. And I am an old and weak man, and I would need rest, and I am mutilated in body and blind. But I see that none of you would know how to govern and command like me. If you allow me to take the sign of the cross to accompany and instruct you, and my son remains in my place to defend the city, I would go to live and die with you and the pilgrims. And of course, everyone starts crying. Everyone shouts, yes, yes, go, go. And the Doge takes the cross and will depart at the head of the Venetian contingent. Villehardouin says, who is clearly enthusiastic about this, that the brave man would have had every opportunity to stay home because he was an old man and had beautiful eyes in his head, yet he saw nothing, having lost his sight due to an injury he had to his head. He was of great heart. How little they resembled those who had gone to other ports to avoid danger, and so the fleet set sail. I won't make it long here, but it would be worth reading the entire account that Robert de Clary gives, who embarked on that fleet, of the wonderful spectacle. They actually have, in different ways, medieval warfare from ours, and they see beauty in it. There is a very strong aesthetic sense. A fleet that departs with all the masts, the flags, everything painted, everything colored, the coats of arms, the bands playing, the trumpets, the drums, the clergy singing Veni Creator Spiritus. Being on board that fleet is an experience. Even just seeing it depart is an unforgettable experience. And so they depart. I won't elaborate. They arrive at Zara, take it, loot it, and divide the spoils. After that, the Venetians say, you know, it's a bit late to go all the way to Egypt. Maybe it's better if we stay here, winter over. And then next spring, we all go to Egypt. In the meantime, they also have to do something a bit unpleasant. That is, they must write to the Pope to tell him what they have done. And they write, and the Pope is not happy at all. And he writes to them that they have done very wrong to do this. But anyway, he absolves them as long as they don't do it again. And they take care not to attack other Christians. And so it is true that in winter one does not sail in the Mediterranean. Obviously they stay at home, so they spend the winter there. And in December 1202, Marquis Boniface of Monferrato arrives in Zara, finally to take command of the army. And with him arrives a mysterious and exotic character. Because Marquis Boniface, before departing, went to Germany to greet the emperor, his lord, and at Christmas at the emperor's court, he met a young prince who came from Constantinople, from Byzantium, from a world that is at the same time very close and incredibly far away. From Constantinople, a young prince had arrived in Germany named Alexios Angelos, son of Emperor Isaac II. The young prince escaped from Constantinople in disguise and came to the west to seek help because his father had been deposed in a coup. The coup was carried out by his uncle, Isaac's brother, who deposed him, blinded him, and took power. The son Alexios managed to escape and is now coming to seek help. He arrives from the Byzantine Empire. Now imagine what the Byzantine Empire is like at that moment. It is no longer a vast empire, but it still includes the Balkans, a good part of Asia Minor, Crete, Cyprus, and the immense capital, Constantinople. It is an empire where they speak Greek, which no one in the West understands. The fact that they speak Greek, by the way, also means that they read Homer in the original text, that they read the Greek tragedians, which is something that no one in the West even knew existed. Instead, the Byzantines read Aeschylus and Euripides and speak Greek. In fact, our Westerners call them the Greeks, but they, the inhabitants of the Byzantine Empire, do not consider themselves Greeks. They think of themselves as Romans, because that is the Eastern Roman Empire, which has continued without any interruption since the times of Constantine, with its capital in Constantinople. They speak Greek, and in Greek they say we, the Romans. No one in the West believes they are Romans. We are the Romans who speak Latin. However, the Greeks of Constantinople feel like the true Romans and are naturally Christians, but they are a bit different, as they do not recognize the authority of the Pope, which is a sore point in the West. They are also Christian brothers, but they are brothers who are wrong, and they are very wrong. They live in this empire which, compared to the West, is all divided into kingdoms, counties, principalities, independent communes, with 1,000 powers competing against each other. In contrast, the Byzantine Empire is a crazily centralized empire, governed by an emperor with full powers until the next coup. A powerful bureaucracy, a state-controlled economy where no one is allowed to make too much profit, and the state controls the entire economy, while in cities like Venice, there is wild capitalism. In fact, it is no coincidence that Italian merchants are already consuming the economy of the Byzantine Empire at this time, because the Byzantine Empire, with its centralized system, cannot withstand the competition from Italian merchants. Who knows that world? It is precisely the merchants who know it. Constantinople is full of Venetians, Genoese, Pisans, and people from Pisa. And then the rulers know it, because at the level of rulers, negotiations take place with the Byzantines, and alliances and marriages are exchanged. Why did Alexios come from Constantinople to Germany to ask for help? Because the emperor married his sister. And why does Boniface take him along when he goes to Zara to take command of the Crusader army? Because they are relatives as well. Boniface's older brother, Conrad, had married Alexios's aunt. At that level, the world of rulers is unique, all interconnected. So Boniface brings the young Alexios Angelos to Zara, who has dealings with the Crusaders and the Venetians, one of those proposals that is hard to refuse. And that is to say, he says, you understand, the evil uncle has deposed my father. Let's go back. Help me regain the throne, punish the usurper, defend my legitimate rights before God. And I commit to financing the crusade with a huge contribution. They set the figures, of course. There you go. Not only does Alexios commit, knowing what the other weak point is besides money, I commit to bringing the Greek church back to the obedience of Rome if you help to regain the throne. He makes these colossal promises. It is not very clear. How surprised the leaders of the Crusaders were, indeed, to tell the truth. It is likely that this was already in the air, that they had understood that this offer was materializing. But the Venetians are undoubtedly very eager to accept, because how to say, Constantinople is the other great commercial hub besides Alexandria and Egypt. There are colossal commercial profits to be made, and the Venetians in Constantinople for a long time had all the commercial privileges, while the last emperors favor the Genoese, favor the Pisans, and the Venetians are resentful. And here enters the scene, if you will, our third protagonist. I have spoken to you about two of the Crusaders, Geoffroy de Villehardouin, the great baron, Robert de Clarille, the poor knight. But the third witness is a Greek, or rather he is a Roman, as he would say. He is a high-ranking official of the Byzantine Empire, a minister, a person of the highest level, named Nicetas Choniates. And Nicetas, who is a minister of the emperor, also tells this story. Now his voice comes in, recounting how Alexios went to the Venetians to make these proposals. But Nicetas is convinced that it is the Venetians who have orchestrated everything. Alexios is a puppet. The black soul of this whole story is Doge Enrico Dandolo, who seemed like a great hero to the Crusaders. Nicetas has a rather different view of what he calls the Dux Veneticon, Enrico Dandolo, a man without eyes and indeed very advanced in years, but an envious one who hated the Romans, a cunning impostor, who proclaimed to be so wise and could not wait to make the Romans pay. In short, according to Nicetas Choniates, it is the Venetians who took advantage of Alexios. He was a little boy. He didn't really know what he was promising. They made him sign everything they wanted. Nicetas states exactly a sea of money that he did not have. And then this shame, you see. Alexios promised with great lightness for Byzantine society to return to the obedience of Rome, which is an intolerable shame because Rome is wrong and we are right. Only a foolish young boy who allows himself to be manipulated by foreigners could have promised such a thing. To renounce the faith of our fathers, to obey those, says Nicetas, of old Rome. Because Constantinople is Rome, of course, the new Rome, while that of the popes is the old Rome, sunk in sin and error. As you can well imagine, Alexios' proposal is discussed among a few, so to speak, admitted to the secret, among the leaders, among the barons, Villehardouin, is naturally present. They discuss, and of course there are those who disagree, because it was about attacking Christians, and they did not set out for this. Rather, they wanted to go to Palestine. And the other side, Villehardouin says, responded to them, "Gentlemen, you will achieve nothing in Palestine." Gentlemen, it's normal, right? Good sir. Among gentlemen, among knights, among barons in Old French, one addresses others like this. "Good sir, gentlemen, you will achieve nothing. Do you want to go and die of hunger down there? We have no money, we have no supplies. The Venetians and Alexios promise us everything. Come on, let's put the boy who has all the rights back on the throne. God will be pleased, and then we will finally set off for Egypt." In the end, those who disagree leave, and the others decide to go to Constantinople. Only at this point, Roberto and Clarice say, they told us about it too. They decided everything among the leaders. Then finally they told us too. And at that point, they brought the bishops forward. And we asked them if it was a sin to do this thing of going to Constantinople. And the bishops replied that it was not a sin at all. On the contrary, it was a great good deed, because we had the legitimate heir who had been disinherited. And it was absolutely right to help him defend his rights. And so, when spring 2004 arrived, they set sail from Zara. They touch Corfu and various other places. At the end of June, they land on the Asian coast in front of Constantinople. And here again, they open their eyes wide. Almost none of them have ever seen a city like this. Villehardouin. Now you can know that those who had never seen it before looked at Constantinople a lot, unable to believe that there could be such a strong city in the whole world. And know that there was indeed no one so brave that their flesh did not tremble. And it was not surprising, because such an important undertaking had never been faced by anyone since the world was created. Naturally, Villehardouin writes later, when everything is already done. And they have built this interpretation of what they have done. The greatest undertaking the world has ever seen. And thus the wonder of the Crusaders arriving at this immense metropolis. But Robert de Clary also speaks of the wonder of the inhabitants of Constantinople who see this enormous fleet arriving. They were mounted on the walls, on the roofs of the houses, and on balconies and terraces to carefully observe that amazing wonder. Naturally, while the Crusaders looked at Constantinople, they were probably divided between saying to themselves, it can't be that easy to actually take it, and thinking about the riches that are inside. The Greeks, looking out from the walls, see arriving an immense fleet of barbarians coming from the west, from that west from which nothing good ever comes. The barbarians, the Westerners, are barbarians, and they are Westerners. Nicetas calls them just that, right? When he speaks of them, he sometimes calls them the Latins. We are the Greeks, they are the Latins, but more often Nicetas says those from the West. And these from the West are bad people. They are strange people. They are also physically different from the Romans of Constantinople, because the Romans of Constantinople wear beards. Nicetas instead says, these guys shave their beards. In Europe at that time, beards were not in fashion. No one wore them. Nicetas says they always look young with their cheeks shaved this way compared to us here. Nicetas also gives the date of the arrival of the Crusaders. It was the beginning of the month of July of 6711, because in Constantinople they do not count the years from the birth of Christ, but they count them from the creation of the world. And their scholars studying the Bible have calculated how much time has passed since the creation of the world, and thus their calendar goes forward from that time. Now they are in 6700. Just think of a civilization that knows it is living in the year 6711. Well, the Crusaders have arrived and still hope that the young Alexios, who has promised Maria Monti, says they are all in favor. As soon as we arrive, they will open the gates for us. So the Crusaders put Alexios on a boat and take him under the walls, hoping that the people will recognize him. No one recognizes him. Great disappointment. And so it will be necessary to besiege the city. Meanwhile, inside the city, the usurping uncle, I already told you his name is Alexios too, has become Emperor Alexios III, the usurping uncle who until now didn't really believe that the Latins were actually coming. When they talked to him about it, he thought it was a joke, says Nicetas. He hadn't made any preparations. Now that they have arrived, he starts to get moving, goes to check the situation of the fleet, and discovers that the entire fleet of the Byzantine Empire consists of 20 rotten boats eaten by worms. We do not have a fleet, the main defense of the city. There are naturally Greek troops, Greek cavalry, but the real strength, the ones capable of defending the city, are the Varangians. They are Norwegian, Danish, and English mercenaries, whom Byzantine emperors have been bringing from the north for centuries. For centuries, the Vikings have known that if one wants to make a career and earn a lot of gold coins, they must go south. They must go to Constantinople, where the emperor pays well. And the Varangians, whom Nicetas also calls the barbarians armed with axes, are this heavily armored infantry, armed with these large axes, and they are the main defenders of the city. Then, to defend the city, there would also be those from Pisa, because being enemies of the Venetians, if the Venetians are against it, the Pisans are in favor. The Pisans do business with Constantinople. There is a Pisan colony in the city, and they are preparing to help the Greeks defend the city. And finally, the Crusaders launch the assault on the walls. And here you see, it's just like in the movies. Even if it seems incredible, it's like in the movies. There's an incredible city by the sea. A part of the walls faces directly onto the sea. There you go underneath with the galleys, trying to raise ladders from the galleys. And where there is a bit of beach, they try to land on the beach, and there are two ladders, leaning the ladders against the walls and climbing up, like in the movies or video games. From above, they throw boiling pitch at you. They throw stones. From the galleys, they shoot with bows and crossbows. To try to drive the defenders away from the walls, the knights climb the ladders. Above there are the Danes with axes trying to pull them down. They attempt, but they don't succeed. And at this point, the Doge takes the initiative again, much to Villehardouin's great enthusiasm. And now you will be able to hear an extraordinary feat, because the Doge of Venice, who was an old man and could see nothing, was fully armed at the bow of his galley with the banner of St. Mark in front of him, and he shouted to his men to put him down, otherwise he would have them executed. And so they did, as the galley lands, and they jump out, and they bring the banner of St. Mark to the ground in front of him, and they disembark. And after a moment, it is unclear how the banner of St. Mark is on one of the towers. However, the Venetians stop there because they do not dare to go further. And at this point, Emperor Alexios, who is inside and is not a soldier, is forced by the fury of the people to do something. The people begin to be seriously frightened. Alexios takes the lead of his Greek troops and exits the city en masse to confront the Crusaders. And here this story is told by Roberto Clary, who was there, one of the knights who, when they see the enemy approaching, must decide what to do. The entire army of knights is organized into 7 units, do you understand? A lord, a great lord with his banner, with his vassals. How many are we? 10, 15, another great lord with his vassals. Altogether about 100 knights, some banners. We form a unit to the Count of Flanders, 1 unit. The Count of Champagne, 1 unit. They decide that they need to defend the camp. Most will stay to defend the camp, 4 of the units. The other 3 units, on the other hand, go to meet the enemy. Roberto Ecleri says it was a strict organization. Each unit had 2 commanders who decided whether to stop, march, or charge. And we began to move because he was there in the second of these 3 units that started to advance at a march towards the emperor who had exited the city with all his troops. He was there in the second of these units. In the first was the Count of Flanders. He had undoubtedly requested the honor of having the vanguard, because as always in these cases, what is done is to show who you are and to earn glory, as well as loot afterwards, of course. And so the vanguard is obviously the most dangerous position. Before starting, there is plenty of time. To begin, of course, they discuss who goes first, and I say, I will. That's fine. And the Count of Flanders cannot say no to him. The Count of Flanders goes ahead of everyone. Behind is the other battalion, the other unit, where Roberto Eclerc is with his lord, Messer Pierre of Amiens, whom Roberto Eclerc never mentions without saying the beautiful and brave Messer Pierre of Amiens, my lord. And I was there with him. We are in second place. Then at a certain point, the advisors of the Count of Flanders say to him, but will it be wise to go meet the enemy? But wouldn't it be better to go back and stay close to the camp? Because there we fight better and we have all our men behind us who can help us. Yes, yes, come on, it's better, let's go back. And the first squad under the command of the Count of Flanders begins to turn back. And those in the second wave, Robert de Clary joins his lord. See, the first wave coming back and stop. I quote from Robert de Clary, who was there and lived the day of his life that time. And everyone says, all together, that the Count of Flanders was doing a shameful thing, retreating even though he had the vanguard. And they all say together, sire, sire, the Count of Flanders is retreating. Since he is retreating, he leaves you the vanguard. Let's take it in the name of God. Meanwhile, the Count of Flanders retreats and realizes that they have remained still. He sends him a message saying, please come back as well. And Sir Pierre Damien replies that they will not return at all. But I must tell you this in the old French of Robert de Clary. And Sir Pierre Damien sends them back that they will not return at all. And the Count of Flanders sends them more messengers to say that for God they should not bring him this shame, and that they should also come back, that he has returned because they advised him to do so, but they refuse. And Pierre Damien commands, gentlemen, ride in the name of God at a walk, and all those who had remained behind began to shout, look, look, the Count of St. Paul and Sir Pierre Damien are going to fight the emperor. Lord God, they began to shout, Lord God, protect them today and all their company. Look, they have the vanguard that the Count of Flanders was supposed to have. After that, Robert de Clary, who was there, and I don't know if he had time to raise his eyes towards the city. Maybe he did. But later, when he remembers this, he remembers it very well. That while we were there, we were moving forward towards the enemy, and we had the vanguard. All the women and girls of the city were there at the windows watching us. And this is the formidable thing. We were there looking magnificent. And the girls were watching us, the ladies, the maidens of the palace, and those of the people on the walls. And they said among themselves that our men looked like angels. So beautiful were they. Whoever told it to him, Robert de Clary, the Greek girls, but in any case, that thing is certain. We were beautiful, so the Count of Flanders, ashamed, turns back, catches up with them, and they move forward equally because no one wants to yield. They move forward cautiously, and Emperor Alexios gets frightened. He turns his back and returns to the city with all his people, and they remain outside, masters of the field, without having to strike a blow with a sword. Villehardouin, who is a bit colder here than Robert de Clary, comments, and know that there was no one so brave as to not be very happy. In other words, no one said it would have been better if they stayed outside than we fought. No, very well. Like this. They went back inside, we won without fighting. At this point, however, Alexios is finished because the people of the city no longer recognize his authority. He did not have the courage to face the invading barbarians and flees. Alexios III boards a boat with his treasure and secretly leaves the city. Nicetas Choniates, who had been his minister, comments on Alexios's flight. or rather he paints a little portrait of the usurper who has fled. He says, well, he was a great coward, but not a bad person. He was a pleasant person to discuss with. He didn't have people nailed in the eyes or have their hands and feet cut off, says Nicetas, turning into a cook of men. Here, a Byzantine emperor is one who cooks men, those he dislikes, his opponents, his adversaries. He was a decent person all in all, but he was a usurper and had a guilty conscience. He feared the justice of God. He was always restless, anguished. At this point, Constantinople wakes up without an emperor who takes control of the situation. The palace eunuchs and the armed guards with axes, the Danish and English Varangians who are the main military force. They come to an agreement. What do? Let's put Isaac back on the throne. Let's go get him. The usurper had him blinded. Oh well, they lead him by hand. Blind as he is, they put him back on the throne. And Isaac on the throne says, but go call my son who is outside with the barbarians. And so they send to call Alexios. Isaac associates him with the throne. He obviously becomes Alexios IV. But the Crusaders, before allowing Alexios to go, to let him return to the city, make sure that also his father Isaac, he confirms all the commitments made, the money, the support for the crusade, and so on. Isaac signs everything. Nicetas, who is there and sees everything, puts his hands in his hair. For days and days, the leaders of the Westerners arrived at the palace, sitting there in the presence of the emperor, needing to be received, all there flattering them, our benefactors. Our saviors, all spending on gifts, banquets. They emptied the imperial treasury, and for these barbarians, there was never enough because no other people is greedier for wealth than the Westerners. Oh, they have peacefully taken Constantinople at this point. They are staying outside, but anyone who wants can go sightseeing in the city. It is the moment when many people from the Crusader army discover for the first time what Constantinople is. General wonder palaces, churches, and historical relics of saints. It is truly a wonderful moment, but indeed it doesn't last. Because the people of Constantinople poorly tolerate these arrogant foreigners who have come to command in our home. The emperors favor them, which is very wrong. The clashes begin. The aggressions against Western tourists begin. Incidents start. At a certain point, the Crusaders learn an incredible and unheard of thing, that there is even a Muslim neighborhood in Constantinople with a mosque. It is inconceivable. They proceed to carry out a punitive expedition to go burn the mosque. The local Muslims defend themselves. The Christian Greeks rush to help their Muslim neighbors and repel the Crusaders. In the clash, a fire breaks out, a huge fire that devastates a large part of the city. Entire neighborhoods are burning. The Forum of Constantine is burning. Part of the Hippodrome is burning. Churches, palaces, commercial streets full of shops are burning. Many dead, many people homeless, people who have lost everything. For several days, one can only move by sea. So much so that the fire and smoke occupy the city. It also burns the house of Uniceta Coniate, among other things, the great palace that this minister had. Meanwhile, the relations between the local population and the Crusaders are now terrible. And the young Alexios and his father Isaac decide that at this point they will not honor their commitments to the Crusaders, also because there is no money anyway. So they do not pay. The Crusaders insist. There is the contract, there is the agreement, nothing. They do not pay. They send a small group of ambassadors to the emperor's palace with the task of telling him that if he does not pay, they challenge him and he will pay dearly. These ambassadors go there not knowing if they will all return unharmed. And Villardieu is also there, he recounts. Well, here we are. They welcomed us. We arrived. We were armed. We went in armed. We entered the throne room. The two emperors were there, all their ministers, the guards. We gave our little speech. We told them that if they did not pay, they should consider themselves challenged. Then we turned around and went back. Fortunately, no one moved and we went back. But it had never happened that foreigners openly challenged the emperor in his palace and came out unscathed. Luckily. Robert de Clary also knows about another thing. He was told this. It may not be true, but it is plausible.
He knows that the Doge also had a dialogue with the young Alexios. The young Alexios on the shore, on horseback, the Doge on the usual galley, and the gist of the conversation is that the Doge finally said to the emperor, I quote verbatim, "Rascal scoundrel, we pulled you out of the muck, and we will put you back in the muck." At this point, the Crusaders are preparing to besiege Constantinople for the second time. But inside the city, the power of the emperors is collapsing because they are unpopular as well. Meanwhile, Father Isaac is jealous of his son Alexios, who has taken matters into his own hands. The blind father is surrounded by people who tell him about oracles and prophecies that he will regain his sight, rejuvenate, and become emperor of the world. As for the young Alexios, he is accused of spending time in sadomasochistic orgies with his courtiers. In the end, the coup inevitably arrives. Another big character who is called, guess what his name is? Alexios. Alexios Doukas takes power, eliminates both the old Isaac and the young Alexios, and crowns himself Emperor Alexios V. At this point in the Crusader camp, the discussion is not just one, because Robert de Clary also says, when we learned that Alexios had been killed, many said, and who cares, he wasn't paying anyway, I don't care at all. Others said, oh no, it's a shame, someone who dared to kill his lord and usurp the throne, we must avenge him. They are there discussing what to do. The usurper, Alexios V, so to speak, is risking everything because he sends word that they must leave. And when they see this arrogant message arriving that says, now you must leave, the leaders of the Crusaders at that point, they all agree. Who? This? Is this sending us to say these things? This one who assassinated his lord at night in betrayal. Is he coming to give us orders? But now we will show him. Do you understand what kind of people they are, right? Normally. And how they reason and what their reactions are. We will show him. At that point, the speech is very clear. Gentlemen, these Greeks are traitors. They are people who do not keep their promises. They are murderers, criminals. They deserve nothing. We will now conquer the empire and take it for ourselves. The Venetians and the French Crusaders come to an agreement. We will divide Constantinople and we will divide the empire, half for each. We will elect an emperor. It will be one of the Crusader leaders. We will elect a new patriarch of Constantinople. It will be a Venetian. We will share all the spoils, and these decisions are communicated to the army. Everyone is indeed informed that currently, to restore justice, to defeat the wicked usurper, and to punish these wicked Greeks who are now also starting to say that they do not want to obey Rome, that they do not want to obey the Pope, and therefore do not deserve to be independent, we will now conquer the city and the empire. The loot will be put in common and shared equally in a fair and honest manner. They really believe it, huh? They make everyone swear. They make them swear that they will not rape the women and that they will not strip them of their clothes, and whoever is caught in the act would be killed. And they made them swear on the saints that no one would touch monks, clerics, or priests except in self-defense, and that they would not loot churches and monasteries. And the siege begins again. With this atmosphere, we are almost finished. With this climate of religious enthusiasm this time, because truly this time God is with us. They are commanded by an infamous murderous usurper and are enemies of Rome. God is with us, and indeed it seems that God and the Madonna are with them. Because when the usurper goes into battle carrying with him the great icon of the Madonna, which Byzantine emperors have always carried into battle and which promises victory, the Crusaders win and seize the icon, and they bring it to their camp where it is welcomed with immense enthusiasm by all the clergy, with all the greatest honors. The Madonna has come to our side. The usurper returns to the city and tries to hide the fact that he has lost the icon. Then after a while, they take it out on a boat as usual to show it to everyone. We have the icon. That said, the siege does not go well at first. The attack is repelled. The Greeks from the walls, Roberto and Clary, the Greeks mounted on the walls, shouting at the Crusaders who were retreating. In short, they pulled down their trousers and showed them their butt. And at this point in the Crusader army, doubts begin to arise. But is God really with us? Why aren't we winning? And so the clergy must work hard and say, no, the battle is just. The battle is just. God is surely with us. These are enemies of the Pope, enemies of the true faith. They say that the law of Rome is worth nothing, which is not true. And anyway, since we are at it, let's remove all the prostitutes from the camp. It is the first time we learn what we could have also imagined, that like any military camp of the past, the Crusaders' camp is full of prostitutes. But at that moment, when we need God and the Madonna to be with us, we must show that, after all, we are doing something. And finally, they make the last assault and manage to breach the walls. Those above pour down boiling pitch and stones, creating a breach in the walls. This is recounted by Robert de Clary, who was there again, and with him was his brother, who was a cleric, but evidently one of those who had been made clerics for family politics. Yet, how can I say, knew how to do something else better. Robert de Clary recounts everything in the third person, saying, we were there, the breach was made, and no one dared to enter. And there was a cleric named Alayom de Clary, who was always the first in all the assaults. When Alayom the cleric saw that no one dared to enter, he stepped forward and said that he would go in there. And there was a knight there, his brother, named Robert de Clary, who forbade him. He said he would not enter at all. And the cleric said he would do it and pushed himself in with hands and feet. When his brother saw him, he grabbed him by the foot and started pulling him out. But despite his brother's wishes, the cleric entered. When he was inside, many Greeks rushed at him. The cleric pulled out his knife and ran towards them, making them all flee. At that point, everyone entered. Word spreads in the city that the Crusaders have entered, and the citizens begin to bury their wealth underground in the garden or to flee. The usurper Alayom V, just to change things up, also flees by boat with his family. The Crusaders stop because advancing into this immense city, even though already half devastated by fire. But the next day, the clergy comes to meet them in procession to ask for peace. And at this point, it is simply necessary to grant the soldiers of the army the traditional 3 days of looting, because an army that has taken a city by force, according to the laws of war, has the right to organize looting. You have sworn not to rape anyone. You have sworn to share the spoils. Go. Robert de Clary recounts the sack in idyllic terms. After the city was taken, no one was harmed, neither poor nor rich, and those who wanted to leave did so, while those who wanted to stay remained. After that, Robert also opens his eyes wide. You can't imagine the loot. Since the creation of the world, no such loot has been seen, neither in the time of Alexander nor in the time of Charlemagne. And you understand. Do you understand what they have in their heads? What have they read? What have they been told? How can you blame them? Who are the great men? Alexander the Great. Why? He made great conquests. Charlemagne. Why? He made great conquest. And we too have made great conquest. And then, however, the wonder. At this point, Robert Clary dedicates 6 pages to describing the wonders of Constantinople. And the word keeps coming up. And they were very amazed by the church of Hagia Sophia. And in another place, there was another wonder. And he describes the hippodrome with its grandstands. And there was another wonder in the city, and he writes about the statues. And another wonder, and I have told you about all these wonders, but there were many more that we cannot possibly tell you. All these wonders were undoubtedly found by the French in Constantinople when they had conquered it. And Robert says, I stop, because if someone were to tell you 100th of the wonders we found, it would seem like a fantasy, and no one would believe it. Now, to conclude, the beauty is that this story is also told by Nicetas Choniatis, who was there on the side of those who were conquered. Nicetas, I must say, confirms that the sack was not characterized by excesses of atrocity. No one was killed, and he never speaks of anyone being killed. He describes these invaders, these irritable barbarians, who seek money, who seek gold, always ready to shout, to threaten, describing people beaten, stripped, women raped, those indeed. They enter the houses asking the owners to bring out the hidden treasures and demanding beating some while treating many others well, but using threats against everyone. And then he says it is true that at a certain point they said, all right, whoever wants to leave can leave. And we also left. And here he begins to recount his personal story. He who was a great figure, a minister, a very wealthy man, but who lost his palace in the fire, and now he is in another house, saying we had moved to a porticoed house that was difficult to access, with a dark entrance, ideal for hiding given the situation. So he says all our friends came to our house. We were all there. And among our other friends, there was a Venetian who had lived in Constantinople for a long time, with whom we did business, because the city was also full of Westerners. And this Venetian helped us. This Venetian kept the looters away from us. Then he helped us leave the city when the time came, and we left the city. The servants had all disappeared. It was us, the family, the friends, with the children in our arms, on foot. We left, crossing paths with the horsemen who looked at us badly. Then after a while, we noticed that the barbarians were especially looking at the girls. So we told the girls to dirty their faces with mud and to stay in the middle of the group. And so we got outside. But we had just barely exited when another particularly arrogant barbarian arrived, saw a girl from our group, wanted to take her, grabbed her, and took her away. And he left, taking her with him, and we ran after him, shouting. And then fortunately we met some other barbarians who spoke a little of our language. And we explained to him what was happening, and they came with us. And we reached this guy who had entered the house taking the girl with him. And the other barbarians attacked him and told him he had to let her go, which he didn't want to. But in the end, they forced him. I, Nicetas says, reminded him that they had sworn to leave the women alone. And in the end, this guy let the girl go, and we were able to leave. These abominations were indeed committed by the armies that came from the West against a Christian people. Robert de Clary, and here I really close, says one more thing. The division of the spoils did not end well. Everyone brought the spoils in common, and then all the gold disappeared. The leaders who were guarding the treasure began to take it for themselves, and there they started to behave badly towards the common people. They took the best accommodations. They took all the most valuable spoils. For us ordinary people, only silver remained. The gold disappeared. And then, however, the leaders paid a very high price, because in reality the story wouldn't end here. Because then there would be the story of how the leaders of the Crusaders appointed an emperor and divided the empire. And then in the following years, they all died fighting against the Greeks or against other barbarians. And Robert, who instead returned home to Picardy with precious relics that he gave to the parish, had the time to tell this story. And he indeed says it. The others paid a very high price, as you will hear later, and he continues to tell it, but we instead will not do so. You might hear the rest of the story another time. Thank you.